What are some things that the Texans need to do to improve this offseason, knowing that they were a 3-13-1 team last year?
Well, I mean, it's number one, glaringly obvious. You got to fix the quarterback. You haven't had anything since Deshaun Watson had his potential MVP year when they went to the playoffs a few years ago. You had Davis Mills, who everybody on our social media said, y'all don't know what you're talking about. Davis Mills is nice. He needs more time. He needs to develop. Blah, blah, blah. He sucked. Okay. He was horrible. The record speaks for itself. I don't want to hear it. And then you later in the season went to a two quarterback system where Jeff Driscoll was taking snaps for a mobile quarterback. Offensively, the Houston Texans looked absolutely lost. The only bright side to it was former Gator Dameon Pierce, who unfortunately ended up getting hurt towards the end of the season and got shut down. But I mean, with the record that they had, it's probably best for him to get healthy anyway, and I guess prepare for the more disappointing next season as it is. But you got to go and draft a quarterback. Again, I said it in the last segment. You have 4 potential quarterback prospects that can come out here and change a franchise. With them having the number 2 overall pick, it's got to be Bryce Young. It's got to be Will Levis, C.J. Stroud, whoever it is you decide. I would have to say it's got to be Bryce because, again, Bryce is probably the best prospect out of all of them available. It's just his height that is in question. But draft a quarterback. Figure out who the leader of this franchise is going to be for the foreseeable future. You have DeMeco Ryans now, a former Houston Texan, a defensive-minded guy. He's going to get that defense right. This defense was not bad last year whatsoever. I would say that it was a little bit above average in terms of overall defense. This offense has got to change because you got to put points on the board. So I would definitely say draft a quarterback. And then second for me right now, you got to add some more playmakers. Brandon Cooks has been in the trade market for the last, I don't even know how many years. He ends up not wanting to play for them anymore. He wasn't available because of injuries. Then you also have the wide receiver that they drafted last year. I forget his name, who unfortunately had leukemia, so he didn't get to play.
John Mechie.
Huh?
John Mechie.
John Mechie. We know the talent that he provided when he was in college and how he was able to blow the top off of a defense. But again, with unfortunately him coming down with leukemia, that limited their options because he wasn't available. Then you go and you get O.J. Howard, and he ends up tearing his ACL. Again, like I said, Dameon Pierce, he ends up getting hurt at the end of the year. There was a big issue with lack of depth at the receiver, tight end, and running back position. So overall, you are going to need to bolster this offense with depth, additive weapons, somebody that can complement Brandon Cooks on the outside if Brandon Cooks does decide to stay in Houston. And if not, you're going to need to go get a definitive number 1 wide receiver. I don't know Houston's cap situation right now. It's probably a tab I should have had open. I'm drawing a blank. But at the end of the day, you need to figure out what you're going to do with the quarterback that you draft because you need to build a system around him, and you need to find a way for that to be fluid, seamless, and consistent because more than likely the future of this franchise is going to be in the hands of a rookie next season. And if he's got no weapons to throw to, it's going to be another issue just like it was in Chicago.
And Kev, just to make one more point about some of the things that the Texans need to address this offseason, Kev, it's the amount of offensive turnovers that they had the past year. Like you said, Davis Mills, really, depending on who you asked, was supposedly going to be this next big guy that was going to step up for that quarterback spot in Houston, and it just ended in disaster. And when you look at the Houston Texans from an offensive perspective, Kev, they turned the ball over almost more than any other team in the NFL. And it's kind of crazy knowing that the Texans actually had a really good defense when it comes to turning the ball over. Because let's look at it from this perspective. Obviously I just outlined how many turnovers that the Texans have had the past year. You compare it to what the defense did. The defense was top 5 in taking the ball away from opposing offenses. And it's crazy that a team like the Texans, who had a 3-13-1 record, would have a stat like that, where essentially they are in the same ballpark when it comes to defensive effort and turning the ball over with teams like the Patriots and the San Francisco 49ers. It's kind of crazy when you put the Texans in that same discussion because when you would first think about the Texans, everybody would just assume, oh, well, they're just god-awful. And granted, their record does indicate that. But I can't say that about the defense. The defense, even though they're losing games, the defense is out there getting turnovers. And in large part, the reason why that the Texans had a -1 turnover differential from last season was simply just because the defense was able to turn the ball over so many times to get the ball back to the offense. it kept them relatively competitive in games where it could have been a lot worse. And this is where things are going to get very dicey when it comes to the offense, because if the offense is turning the ball over that consistently, where they're turning the ball over 25 to 30 times a season, you're just not going to be competitive in any way, shape, or form. And you could look back to some of these games that they've had where a turnover can dictate the outcome of a game. And granted, when it comes to Houston, their offense is up and down to say the least. You never really know what you're going to get. And when I look at it, the quarterback spot is absolutely pivotal to me. And the past year, the quarterback spot, Davis Mills, turned the ball over way too frequently, and it cost Houston to a larger extent. So, there are definitely going to be some significant changes that come with that Houston Texans offense this upcoming season. But to me, they just have to limit their turnovers. And this is going to have to be something that the coaches are going to have to hone in on this offseason, especially when they get into training camp and OTAs, where, look, if a play's just not there to be made, you got to throw it out of bounds or try to run out of the pocket and try to get out of bounds. Trying to throw errant passes into double coverage or throwing these 50-50 balls with a possibility of these passes being intercepted or a turnover potentially happening, they can't afford that, especially with Houston. The margin of error when it comes to the Texans is so slim that even a slight mistake could cost them a game, especially with just the lack of production that the offense has been putting out there over the last couple of years. So to me, just to kind of round this out, I think if the Houston Texans are in any way, shape, or form viable next year, it would be because partly what Kevin had already said, and then one final point from me would be just limiting their turnovers. If they can do that, if they can cut their turnovers by at least a third and maybe up to a half, that can definitely make them more competitive, not only in the AFC South, but maybe to the AFC with a larger extent. Even though that I don't think the Texans are going anywhere significant next year, they can be better than 3-13-1 if they do some of those things that Kevin and I just alluded to.